If you are mixing that alcohol with caffeine and you have something that is blocking the adenosine receptors in your brain, and your brain does not get to feel sleepy because you are sending it a very clear signal that it should be awake and alert, some number of kids will just keep on drinking. They will not have the benefit of being so tired that they stop.
Hi, Cara.
Hi, Vanessa.
Do you hear the giddy excitement in our voices?
I'm going to toast you with my cup of coffee.
I'm going to toast you with my Yeti tumbler with cold brew in it. We are
on theme.
We are on point. And today's episode, in case it wasn't clear with our lame jokes, is about caffeine and forms of caffeine, impacts of caffeine on growing bodies, trends and marketing to kids around caffeine. It is a big, big and important topic. And shout out to Melissa Kilbride, aka the Askable Mama on Instagram, who was a guest on the podcast, who sent us an amazing email with tons and tons of questions that she wanted us to answer. And we are using those today as a jumping off point to talk about all the many facets of how caffeine impacts kids and could impact down the line.
I mean, I'll just start with a little anecdotal story. Vanessa, I don't know if you knew this, but this summer there was apparently a recall of Celsius caffeinated drinks. Do you know about this?
I know to be like scared shitless of Celsius caffeinated
well, and we're going to talk
drinks.
a little bit. I mean, we're not going to just pick on Celsius. Don't worry. But it was recalled because apparently, accidentally, there was alcohol added to a bunch of. Do you know about this?
I think I did.
And I, being the newbie that I am to the energy drink market, I just walk past that aisle and I don't pay any attention. I said to my kids, I was like, "What's Celsius?" And they're like, "What rock do you live under, Mom?" And I started doing a deep dive on all these drinks. And we are going to absolutely cover the gamut of them because your kid does not have to drink coffee to be exposed to very high doses of caffeine and apparently accidentally alcohol. So we'll cover all that. And maybe we'll just start with how people ingest caffeine.
Right. So like, I'm so old school that the conversation I've been having with my kids has been like, essentially, when am I old enough to have a Frappuccino? When can I have a nice coffee? Can I have a sip of your coffee? Right. Like that's my like 1980s version of, I mean, not because when was the Frappuccino invented? Probably in the late 90s. But there's so much more to the conversation around caffeine. And, you know, originally it was just Red Bull energy drink. And now it's a massive, massive, massive market of energy drinks. When I was running half marathons, I would eat jelly beans with caffeine in them halfway through the half marathon, right?
You're
like
so ahead of yourself.
I was like,
I mean, that's impressive.
They were also delicious. They're actually jelly bellies, like watermelon jelly bellies, but with caffeine.
Caffeinated.
You know, there's this evolution and I feel sort of lame because I was, as you were, Cara, a little bit outdated. And then I hear stories from my kids and I read the media about what's going on. And it's actually much more serious than, hey, Mom, can I have a Frappuccino? Not even to mention the cost of having coffee out. That's a whole other conversation.
I'm looking it up while we're chatting. And the Frappuccino was, in fact, invented in 1992.
It's earlier than I thought.
Yeah,
okay.
It's not a Starbucks invention, by the way. It originated in Boston at the Coffee Connection. And by the way, there was a Coffee Connection right near college for me. So that's fascinating. But I don't think that was the one. Anyways.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Acquired Coffee Connection.
Oh,
and so
okay.
It became a Starbucks drink.
Okay.
So there you go. Little history on the Frappuccino.
So why don't we start with actually understanding, is all caffeine created equal? Dosage, for lack of a better word. And then also, how does caffeine affect the body? We should start with the fundamentals.
Right. And I think most people think of caffeine as a drink, but you've already disabused us of the notion because you ate it. So the drinks that people consume that are caffeinated are largely coffee, drinks, teas, and energy drinks. And then there are gummies. I'm not going to call them edibles because you'll make fun of me endlessly, but it's like the edible version of caffeine. So gummies or candies that are caffeinated, caffeine sprays, caffeine gels, and caffeine gums. Like those are the big. I'm sure there's someone who's listening who's like, oh, honey, you've barely scratched the surface. Here are the 20 other ways you can ingest caffeine. Would love to hear them. So send us that info. But these are sort of the most mainstream ways that caffeine is ingested. And the best chart that I have found, that we will put links in the show notes so that people can go there. But if you just go to the Center for the Science in the Public Interest website, CSPI.org, they have charts of how much caffeine is contained in, they have coffee shop coffee lists, bottled coffee lists, ground coffee, teas, sodas and soft drinks, energy drinks, pre-workout drinks, which is a big source for kids now, caffeinated waters. So those energy drinks and energy waters. Then the question I always got as a pediatrician, how much caffeine is in chocolate or ice cream, right? And then in drugs and supplements. And they list hundreds of different amounts of caffeine by serving size, which is so helpful.
Well, and it's a fun game to play with your kids, right? If you're sort of in the caffeine debate with a kid in your house or a young person, it's a great way to like do a quiz or have a competition or play a game. When you like, okay, how much would you guess which has more, chocolate or coffee? Whatever it is, it's a way to sort of impart that information to a kid without getting super preachy, because in a minute, this conversation is going to get kind of preachy. And so it's like nice to start out with some fun.
That's right. And, it's important to know that serving size does matter. A cup of coffee can mean different things to different people. A soda and energy drink, some people are drinking 12 ounces, some people are drinking 20 ounces. It's just very all over the place. So I do like the CSPI list because it goes not just by the sort of size, if you will, but also the number of ounces, and it's really clear. And it's those energy drinks that deliver as much caffeine as the coffee that fuels you and me in the morning. In fact, it delivers more. So the standard energy drink on this list, and they go by brand, but the standard energy drink is somewhere between 200 and 300 milligrams of caffeine for a container full. So Monster Java triple shot, 15 ounces is 300 milligrams of caffeine. Okay. Celsius Essentials is 16 ounces, 270 milligrams. And then if you look at the little shots, right? So 5 Hour Energy, right? Those are sold at the checkout counter of basically every store that I shop in for groceries or whatever. A 1.9 ounce 5 Hour Energy has 200 milligrams of caffeine. So that's
how much does a 12 ounce cup of coffee have?
Right. So it's funny. They're realists here. They start with the larger coffees on their coffee list. They start with a Starbucks coffee, just a black Starbucks coffee, 20 ounces of venti is between 390 and 490 milligrams of caffeine, because it depends upon the roasting of the beans, et cetera, et cetera. So if you look at a 12 ounce, that's somewhere in the mid to high 200s of milligrams of caffeine. So an energy drink is a 12 ounce Starbucks coffee. That's the equivalency. But those little shots of energy drinks, right? Less than 2 ounces, you can get through TSA on that little thing, right? It's got a lot of caffeine, and the pre-workout drinks, even more. So these are scoops. These are powders that people mix for their, like the Ghost Legend All Out pre-workout, or the C4 Ultimate pre-workout, or the Transparent Labs bulk pre-training formula. Like what 12-year-old is not trying that, right? The names I just listed, 400 milligrams of caffeine, 300 milligrams of caffeine, 200 milligrams of caffeine. That's a lot of caffeine.
And people are not, just as you and I don't only have necessarily one cup of coffee. People are having, these energy drinks, not just one. Some people do, but some people are doing it. And I will say, a side note, that I have heard of people doing it as meal replacement. Mm-hmm. So it's a way not only to have caffeine, but also the way people use other things as meal replacements or to stave off hunger pains or eating, they use these energy drinks. So that's another thing. What else is going into the body besides the caffeine?
And we should just round out this conversation with the food, the snack question, because I think it's a fair one. I used to get this all the time from kids when I was practicing, can I eat chocolate? Is it caffeinated? Is it bad for me? Is it, we're talking about...
God bless those children, because if anyone in my house ever asked that, I would be like, what are you asking that question for? Of course you can eat chocolate. It's a food group.
And the answer is it's not that heavily caffeinated. I mean, chocolate-covered espresso beans, different story because they have espresso beans in them. But for the most part, chocolate, ice cream, chocolate bars, they're delivering somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, 30, 40 milligrams of caffeine per serving. It's not 200 to 300. I mean, it's not nothing, but it's not as low. And there are caffeinated bars. I did not even know this, Vanessa, but there's like Cliff bars and those kinds of bars. Some of them are sold and branded caffeinated. And even those, they tend to be a little bit lower than a cup of coffee. The highest caffeine content that I can see in one of those bars is about 80 milligrams. So it's not nothing. It's caffeinated, but it's not, we're not talking about 5-hour energy.
This reminds me of a meme I saw on Instagram recently where it was like, okay, I just reached a new low. I saw, I think, guacamole with protein added. Like, when are we going to stop adding protein to stuff? And I was like, did anyone even ask protein's permission? And I feel like caffeine's kind of the same way. Like, they're adding caffeine to like all sorts of random stuff. And you're like, what is happening here? So that's all to say, you may not even be aware of all the ways and places that caffeine is being added. Your kid likely is more aware than you are. Thank you to the grapevine, the deeply educated middle school and high school grapevine of information. So, Cara, what do we need to know? Having a survey of the landscape, how does it affect kids, right? Like, how is it affecting their health? Yeah. I always got away with the line with my kids, like, it's actually, you're not going to grow. It'll affect your growth if you have too much caffeine, which I've since learned is like not entirely accurate, but maybe we start there.
Right. From our little puberty myth video, why it's not accurate. So it's not that caffeine itself stunts growth. It's that caffeine interferes with sleep, and sleep is when people grow. When they're in deep sleep is when they grow. So if you have a shorter duration of sleep, then you have less growth hormone being released in this very pulsatile fashion that tells your bones to grow. And that is why you can say if you consume too much caffeine, then you won't grow as much. But there's sort of two buckets of issues for kids. There's caffeine and sugar, because most of the highly caffeinated beverages tend to also have very high sugar content. Not some of the energy drinks or energy waters, but that certainly, if we go back to our friend, the Frappuccino. Yeah. I mean, right. So the caffeinated sodas, and then also like the Frappuccinos and the coffee drinks and all that, or, there's like, you think there's a lot of caffeine in there. Holy moly, there is so much sugar. And so that's sort of one bucket of worries. And then the other bucket is sort of the caffeine itself and what it's doing to the body. So should we just do like a quick run through of what caffeine is doing to the body?
Yes.
Okay. So caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant. So what this means is it works inside the brain and it changes the way that neurotransmitters, which are the chemicals that go from one end of a neuron to the other end of a neuron, it changes the way that those neurochemicals work, that they're sent across synapses. And very specifically, caffeine binds and blocks the receptors on the end of a receiving neuron for the neurochemical called adenosine. And adenosine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So that means that adenosine is involved with things that wind down the body and brain, specifically drowsiness and sleep. So you need adenosine to feel drowsiness and fall into sleep. If something is occupying the adenosine receptor and the adenosine can't get on there, then the adenosine cannot signal the nerve to fire and tell the body to be tired. What occupies that receptor? Caffeine. So that's how it works. It works by blocking inhibition. It is a stimulant because it blocks, an inhibitory neurotransmitter, which is sort of fascinating. So it is why caffeine increases alertness and wakefulness and cognitive function. It also, secondarily, increases neurotransmitters that are stimulatory, not inhibitory. So caffeine helps the brain release more dopamine, more norepinephrine, and more serotonin, right? So that sort of pathway changes our mood, our motivation, our arousal, our heart rate, our respiratory rate. All those things go up with caffeine because caffeine is promoting the release of those neurotransmitters that control all of those things. But at its core, you want to think of caffeine as stopping the thing that slows you down before you think of it as turning on the things that ramp you up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So when in the morning when we wake up and we're sleepy, does that mean caffeine wakes us up because it essentially puts a stoplight on what's it called? Adenosine?
Adenosine.
How does that work in the morning, and why am I so desperate for coffee, and why do I get a headache when I don't have it?
Yeah, well, it's actually a couple answers to that. So yes, it can block adenosine very quickly and boom, you're up. But you're actually asking about the addictiveness of caffeine, right? So you and I have worked together for so many years now, and you live in a time zone that is 3 hours ahead of mine. And you literally watch me take a sip of coffee many mornings, and you see what happens to my brain. You watch me lock in.
I mean, sometimes you ask things or say things, and I'm like, what's happening here? And then I realize it's still early for you and the caffeine hasn't kicked in. And then you'll be like, wait a second, I need my coffee. And then it's like, ding, 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 ding. Here I
am. Totally. Okay. So yes, that is what's happening. Adenosine is being pushed off the receptor. The caffeine is, or the adenosine just isn't on the receptor because it's just not firing because you've been asleep and the caffeine occupies the receptor and now the adenosine can't get there. And there's a little dopamine hit. And my typical wake up is I go to my desk and I'm going to go through my first tranche of emails. And there's always some email that makes dopamine fire in my brain, usually for bad reasons, like I'm reading the news, but sometimes for really good reasons. And I think it's that synergy of having the caffeine on board, blocking the adenosine receptors, and amplifying those dopamine hits. So I think it's all happening. But there's also caffeine addiction, which, I'm the first one to say, I believe that I am addicted to caffeine. And I believe that many, many, many other people who would never identify as addicted to anything, when you look at the criteria for addiction to caffeine, are addicted. So what are the criteria? You're tolerant. You need more and more to get to the desired effects. So I can tell you right now, don't give me a weak cup of coffee. Right?
You won't stand for it.
No. You have withdrawal symptoms. So that's what you were describing, Vanessa: headache, fatigue, irritability when you don't have your caffeine. And I've been traveling over the last couple of weeks and I can't always get my very first cup of coffee, and I feel the headache immediately. Cravings. So an intense desire for caffeine, which I always attribute to the ritual of ingesting the caffeine. I think there's a lot to be said for just holding the coffee cup, smelling the coffee, feeling the heat. But actually, it turns out there's also just a craving that's part of an addiction to a substance. And then I don't have this difficulty controlling intake. That would be like, despite negative consequences, you can't stop. For me personally, I actually do stop after a couple of cups because I don't like the negative consequences, which we'll get to, the jitteriness, the elevated heart rate. To me, that feels sufficiently bad that I'm like, I'm done. And then dependency. That's the fifth criteria of addiction, which is you feel horrible when you don't have it. You're dependent on it. So I hit 4 out of 5. Yeah. I think you do too.
Bravo. Yeah. You didn't mention also being able to poop in the morning after you've had your coffee.
Well, that is true. And there is a gene for that. There may be more than one gene for that. There are people whose guts are more sensitive to caffeine, and there are people whose guts are not. I know. If you're not watching on YouTube, Vanessa's jaw just hit the floor. It is true. It does not work for everyone.
That is so fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, now you guys know which side of the road I'm on with my genetic gut population. So there's all sorts of things for me. And I know people, like, it doesn't bother me that I'm dependent on caffeine. The one day a year that it really sucks is Yom Kippur, when I fast for 25 hours. And I then, by the time the morning of Yom Kippur rolls around, it's been, 24 hours since I've had coffee. I can't have it. I'm also dehydrated. So I do get a headache. And then what I do every year without fail is the fast ends an hour after sundown. And what do? I have a huge cup of coffee. And then what happens every year? I cannot fall asleep. I'm up till like 2 a.m. because I've had a coffee at 7:00 at night. You would imagine I would learn my lesson.
But the question is, what is the lesson to learn for people who are looking to not feel like that? And the answer is you wean yourself.
Right. So every year I'm like, damn it. I was supposed to start a week ago weaning myself or having decaf coffee or cutting back on my coffee, but I never remember.
I know.
And you know what?
I'll help you this year.
It's fine. Maybe you can, because we will actually be together the week before Yom Kippur.
I'll get you.
It's also like not that bad. Then I'm like, okay, I can get through this.
But you know why you can't fall asleep when you have that evening coffee?
Why?
Okay. This is a huge issue for a lot of people, actually. The half-life of caffeine is 5 hours, give or take. Half-life means half of the drug leaves your system by whatever time. So it takes 5 hours for half of the dose of caffeine in that cup of coffee to be gone. So if you have a cup of coffee at 7, at midnight, only half of the caffeine is gone. That is why. And there are people, most of the doctors I know are not sensitive to caffeine in that way. We do not. And I don't think you become a doctor because you don't have that sensitivity. I think you beat that sensitivity out of your brain somehow. I don't know how, but like my husband can hold an espresso, drink it, put his head on a pillow and be out.
I mean, so can mine. And he's the farthest thing from a doctor you will ever encounter in your life. He could have a triple espresso while lying in bed, put it down and immediately fall asleep. So there must be, I don't know, Cara, maybe there's a genetic component to that as well.
Yeah.
I assume
Let's do that
there's
study, Vanessa.
Yeah. Yeah. Just put that in line behind all the other millions of studies we're going to have. So you talked about the impact in the brain, and then can you talk a little more about the nervous system and what happens there?
Well, I'm going to flip it back on you and say, I'm sure you've made the mistake we've all made where you've had too much caffeine. What do you feel in your body?
Heart racing, maybe a little nausea.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Do you get the jitteriness? Do you get that like that fine shake?
If I have like a cold brew in the afternoon, like when you and I are working together, and it would normally be my moment to like just take a breath, and you're like, let's keep going. And so I get a cold brew, and then it's like 3 PM, and I'm like, I have like the shakes. Yeah, I guess I do get all of that. I mean, I'm not a particularly like jittery person. I will typically stop having coffee by 2, maybe around the middle of the day. Sometimes it's still sitting on my desk. But yes, so those are all the sort of nervous system signs that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and cold brew is a little bit more caffeinated than iced coffee.
Right. I now hate iced coffee.
I know you do.
I think it's disgusting.
Like we'll go to a coffee shop and Vanessa will be like, do you have cold brew? And they'll say, well, yes. And she'll say, I don't mean, do you pour coffee over ice?
I'm like, is it iced coffee or is it cold brew?
You're in LA. It's cold brew, man.
And then they're like, it's iced coffee. And I'm like, I need to taste it. Can I have a taste of it? And inevitably, I'm like, she makes a face that is not subtle. So, so essentially, the symptoms of being overcaffeinated look a lot like anxiety. Right? And this gets confusing because, go with me here, caffeine can mimic symptoms of anxiety. It can make people who are predisposed to anxiety or who are grappling with anxiety feel more anxious. But at lower doses, it can be a treatment for anxiety. In the same way that stimulants, I think, I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, but in the same way that stimulants. But you play one on this podcast.
But I play one on this podcast. In the same way that stimulants treat ADHD, a little bit of caffeine can help take the edge off of anxiety, not in all people, but in many. And interestingly, for anyone who's a migraine sufferer, this will not surprise you at all. But caffeine, again, when taken immediately at the onset of a migraine, caffeine can bring on a migraine, but taken at the very start of a migraine, it can also abort the migraine, can stop the migraine. And so it's very, very interesting. By the way, that's what Excedrin is. You know that, right? Excedrin is caffeinated pain medication.
Yeah. I mean, when I was pregnant, early in all my pregnancies, I would get headaches, and I was so busy avoiding coffee and Diet Coke, and the gynecologist was like, "Oh, you're getting headaches? Have some Tylenol and a cup of coffee." I'm like, "What?" And of course, it worked. And if you want to know more about headaches and migraines and treatment, go back to our episode on migraines. It's chock full of tidbits like that, treatment information and explanations for why that happens. So if we know that that's like generally the impact, right, on our adult, theoretically mature bodies that we're conceptually taking good care of, let's transpose that to kids, growing bodies, making different decisions, influx, hormonal looping, all of that stuff. How does caffeine impact them in the short term and in the long term?
So, Vanessa, you ask a really good question, which is,
thank you.
What gives with caffeine in kids? Like, do we have to worry? Is it a thing? Is it right? In the grand scheme of things to worry about, I would say it's not number one on the list, but it creates obstacles for kids that are unnecessary. And so in terms of like, if you're looking for low-hanging fruit in your life where you can make a little change that will have a nice big impact and it won't cause a lot of disruption, removing caffeine from a kid's diet is your number one go-to low-hanging fruit thing. Because we've described caffeine tends to travel with sugar. So that has behavioral impacts and body impacts. Caffeine can interrupt sleep, especially if ingested within 5 or so hours of sleep. So there are all these things. Caffeine can elevate the heart rate and the respiratory rate and make kids who are anxious even more anxious at a certain level. So
And it can replace nutritious things that they could be putting in their mouths and their bodies.
Oh, yes. So like if you're looking for kind of a quick fix that will make them feel better, starting to assess caffeine intake is a great place to start. But like everything, if you come at it with a gigantic, judgy sledgehammer, your kids are going to be not just resistant, they're going to like, yeah, mom, see you later. And walk down to the corner Starbucks and order, what's the biggest one you can get?
Venti?
Grande?
Venti.
A Venti double shot Frappuccino. Like they will push back and push hard if you don't engage them in the conversation around why.
And it's so interesting because the way these things get marketed to kids, when I send my kids in to get me a coffee, like there's sort of I want a coffee and I want to throw them a bone. So I'm like, I need a coffee. Can you go in, get me a coffee and get yourself something fun? They always come out with the biggest size.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, wait, I don't want 42 ounces of I just want a small coffee. And I think they think they're doing something nice, but clearly, and we're going to talk about marketing to kids, clearly there's messaging about what they get and how and when. So it's not just the ingredients, it's also the size. And social media does play a part in their understanding of all of this.
Yeah. I mean, let's start with the ingredient of it and let's talk about athletic performance. So caffeine is very clearly marketed to kids as performance enhancing. And here's the problem. It is.
Thus my record time in the New York City half marathon because I had my caffeine jelly bellies halfway through.
I mean, if it makes your heart rate go up and it makes your respiratory rate, I mean, it's not optimizing your efficiency. In fact, like the super athletes who are listening to this are like, no, it's the opposite. You want to hone the system and the machine in a certain way. But like kids, I mean, my son, when he was racing in high school, every kid in his boat had little ampules of caffeinated drinks. And, he said to me, I don't want to do anything that's that caffeinated. So he would drink yerba mate, a drink that has a whole secondary market in youth. I never would have thought youth athletics and yerba mate would have had a sort of marriage, but they do. And kids know they can lock in, they can focus, they can energize. I mean, it does work. That is the problem. It's a problem with a lot of the things that are marketed to kids, especially in sports or for academic focus. It's like, what do I do? Because at a certain point, there's some efficacy.
But past that point,
correct.
There's not.
There's not. And in fact, we see a whole host of problems that create so much unnecessary drama. I mean, the number of ER doctors I know who are managing kids whose symptoms are really just caused by their caffeine intake. All these kids know how to take their heart rate, which is kind of awesome. But like a lot of them are following their heart rate very closely. And then they're saying to their parent, I don't know what to do because my resting heart rate is high. And no one's asking them about their caffeine consumption. They're just saying like, okay, do you have a fever? Do you have this? Do you have that? And they're asking these medical questions, but they're not getting to the root of it, which sometimes is just the amount of caffeine they're taking or chest pain on account of and sometimes it's real chest pain that's related to other things, but often it's sort of anxiety driven chest pain that's associated with feeling a rapid heart rate and then having anxiety because kids can feel their heart thumping in their chest. And then they will start to have sort of associated pain. And that, listen, you've got to be checked. You have to go to an urgent care or an ER. No one is going to tell you not to. And yet, if we are aware of the amount of caffeine they're consuming and we can help them modulate, hopefully down to almost nothing, then we can skip a lot of these visits to the ER.
Here's the crux of the issue is that we may have set limits and rules in our homes about how much caffeine our kids can consume, what kinds of caffeine they can consume. And yet they are out in the world moving independently. Maybe they're driving, maybe they're walking, maybe they have other sources of money besides, maybe they get allowance or maybe they have a job. And so we may think everything's hunky dory, they're not doing anything. And then it turns out they're drinking 3 energy drinks a day, unbeknownst to us. And so part of the reason it's so important to be in conversation with kids is because if we shut down conversations, we don't know what they're putting in their bodies. And there are impacts, as Cara mentioned, on sleep and, heart health and hydration and performance, like a million different ways. And so going back to the dorky quiz I was suggesting earlier, what that does is it opens up the conversation. It removes some of the judgment. The number of kids my own children will talk about and say, oh yeah, they have like X number of energy drinks a day. And I want to like sort of grab the desk and white knuckle and be like, oh my God, that's disgusting. But I realize if I do that, then they're never going to tell me what they do or don't do. And so I'm sort of like, oh, wow, that's pretty wild. I wouldn't expect that. Like, what do you think about that? How do you feel like that affects them? How does it show up for them during the day?
Vanessa, we have this high school curriculum, right? And my kids started taking some of the courses, some of the lessons that we wrote for this high school curriculum. And one of them is about alcohol. And, my kids are in college and I sort of assumed the curriculum that we're launching is for high school. I sort of assumed they would know everything in the high school curriculum. And cause I'm their mom too. And I was stunned that one of the most incredible pieces of information that my son was like, no one ever taught me that. I was like, no, I've taught you that, but he hadn't heard it from me, was why combining alcohol and caffeine is so dangerous. And this is a place where talk about white knuckling it. So this is a wonderful conversation to have with your kid, apparently more than once, as I learned in my recent experience with my child who said he'd never heard it. Caffeine, as we now know, is a stimulant because it blocks adenosine receptors. Alcohol is a depressant. Alcohol is designed to make you sleepy. Well, it's not designed, but it makes you sleepy. Alcohol makes you sleepy. And that's a protective mechanism against drinking too much, right? If you drink enough, you're going to be so tired, you're going to go to sleep or pass out. Okay. Not endorsing that, but just saying that is one of the byproducts of too much alcohol. However, if you are mixing that alcohol with caffeine and you have something that is blocking the adenosine receptors in your brain and your brain does not get to feel sleepy because you are sending it a very clear signal that it should be awake and alert. What does that do? That does not slow down your alcohol consumption because you're still awake. And so some number of kids will just keep on drinking. They will not have the benefit of being so tired that they stop. And because they don't slow down, they can get into a terrible situation with alcohol poisoning, ending up in the ER. I mean, there are all sorts of really catastrophic outcomes that can happen from too much alcohol consumption. And yet Red Bull and vodka was like the drink of choice for a long time. So there are real conversations to be had and there's real knowledge to be absorbed. And you are so right, Vanessa, like coming in super judgy, never going to be helpful, but coming in as a realist and saying, okay, I want to talk about alcohol, but I also want to talk about why no alcohol with caffeine. Like, just hear me out. They will find that interesting.
Which is hard because the espresso martini has made a major comeback.
Major.
I was like, what is it, $19.95? Like,
yes, but they're also $30. So
right. So you're not going to have more than one.
That's a deterrent.
Cara, what about combining caffeine with stimulants, ADHD medications, SSRIs? Like, what do we know about those combinations?
Yeah. It's complicated because sometimes they can actually work synergistically and it actually works a little bit better in some bodies, especially people who are on low dose stimulants for ADHD and they have a little caffeine and they have what they need. In fact, there are many, many, many adults who have adult diagnosed ADHD and have been caffeine drinkers for a long time and will describe sort of when I drink a cup of coffee, I lock in a little or I don't lock in at all. But when I take my stimulant medication and then I drink a cup of coffee, I'm like good to go, locked in. I don't know, again, not a neuroscientist, but I don't know if that's because they're drinking caffeine and so they end up on a lower dose of that stimulant because they don't need as much. I don't know. But for some people, the combination works okay. Here's the complicating factor. Sleep deprivation can cause either exacerbated ADHD or symptoms that look a lot like ADHD. Like, I don't know about you, Vanessa, but when I don't sleep enough, I am completely irritable. I cannot focus. I cannot sit still. I'm like all antsy. That's what ADHD looks like. So sometimes, there's a good argument for taking a nutritional history and making sure you know what's going into a kid's body. Because if you think their issue is ADHD, maybe it's not. Maybe it's sleep deprivation on account of caffeine. And then you've got all these symptoms. Caffeine is a vasoconstrictor. This is very important. So remember I said, if you take caffeine at the very beginning of migraine, it actually treats it. That's because migraines are caused by blood vessel spasm. And when the blood vessel constricts, it stops the spasm and it constricts and it makes the headache a little bit better. So that's the therapeutic effect of caffeine, but it reduces the blood flow. And I don't know what the impact of that is in terms of learning, in terms of long-term brain health, all that, but it's just sort of something to know, something to note. And then there's sort of the polypharmacy of it all, which is just the general concept that when we're putting so much different competing stuff in our body, first of all, it's maybe not great for our body. And second of all, when something has a side effect, how do we know what's causing the side effect if we've got multiple substances coming in that are targeting the same organ? So I think there are a lot of arguments to, certainly for kids who are being treated for ADHD. I've always taken the line, you know what? This is the thing that's going in your body to help your brain. I would not put other substances in your body. And this is a list of substances, and this is why. And kids with ADHD in general, they're pretty happy to understand the neurochemistry of it.
The place I think we should wrap is if your kid is coming home asking you to buy certain products, you're seeing the allowance is going out of the bank account. You're seeing them pick stuff up on the weekends. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of caffeine or interest in caffeine. You want to find out what's going on and you want to find out where they're learning it from, not just because you want to educate them on what's okay. Like, okay, maybe you're, done growing 16-year-old. You don't have an issue with them having a little caffeine, but you do have concerns about what is it replacing? Are they getting enough sleep? How is their mental health and emotional well-being? All of that. Younger kids really is a concern about, what's going on with their body, but also where are they getting this information from? What are they watching? What are they seeing? What does their For You page on TikTok look like? What are they seeing on YouTube? What ads are being fed to them, right? Because this is part of a larger microcosm of products, games, items being marketed to kids that are not for kids. Like ideally, kids are not ingesting lots of caffeine. Are they being marketed other products? What hole have they fallen down that allows them to be the recipient of this marketing?
And if they give over to the marketing and they do ingest the energy drinks and put the gels on and do all the things, then the next question becomes, what else are they susceptible to in terms of the marketing? Because it becomes a very quick slippery slope. We have idolized caffeine in our culture. We have, every block of every major city has a coffee shop. This is a really, really effective substance that is a very big part of our culture and so many other cultures. And so we have to think about it in those terms.
Does caffeine addiction make us susceptible to other forms of addiction?
I don't know.
Okay, so that's a question for another
That's a question
time.
for another episode. I love that idea. Get back to you on that.
Tara, I'm going to go drink some water now.
Seriously. Bye, Vanessa.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.